Good morning. I'm happy you're joining us today to celebrate the success and evolution of a laboratory that's been tremendous. And we also celebrate the hard work you do today, and we celebrate this by connecting back to our past, by connecting to 50 years of continued progressive success, and the leadership provided by Henry Blosser as he founded the lab, Sam Austin and Conrad Gelbke, our former directors. During this time, for 22 years, one person at MSU has been connected to the success of the laboratory, first as provost since 1993 and as president since 2005. It's my pleasure to introduce Luana Simon, Michigan State University's 20th president.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Thomas. And thanks to all of you for being here today for this great celebration of 50 years of the beam. I've had a privilege, as Tomas said, to witness much of this evolution, or revolution, in nuclear physics at Michigan State University, which started with bold thinking and foresight in the 1950s, well before my time here. It was not long after the big science Manhattan Project ended World War II, with terrifying applying the secrets unlocked with the atom, that John Hanna, based on his government service, tuned into the peaceful potential for nuclear science, for the world and for this university. And he identified a plan, as only John Hanna could, a big idea. And he hired a young guy from Oak Ridge named Henry Blosser to build something here that most folks thought would not come to Michigan State University. And just think where that ended up today and where it will in the future. Transitions are always interesting in science and in people and in the laboratory. And Sam, I want to thank you for the work that you've done to document the story of the laboratory in such an extraordinary way. And I probably should thank you as well for being so disciplined in staying with the facts. Because during this conference and during the days ahead, there'll be lots of stories told that are not in the book, that are also that backstory of people in laboratories. And there's also, I should note, an oral history project that captured Henry's words about the work of the laboratory and the work of the university. And in it he said he wasn't planning on staying very long, because what could a university in the middle of Michigan do about nuclear science? And it's done a lot, thanks to all of you in the room as well. We really want to think about this as not simply an evolution of a project or an evolution of nuclear science, but an evolution of the university as well, into a world leader built on nuclear science and built on people with great vision, great dedication, great passion, and a way of thinking about the world today to make it better, whatever the machine, whatever the problem, and a big vision about what science could do for tomorrow, that big vision. It takes special people then and now and in the future to be able to do that. So this is not simply a celebration of leadership. It is a celebration of all the people over the years, the team Cyclotron, Team MSU, that made all of this possible. And even though the parts may not be reflected in the book, they were really important. Just like the parts today may not be reflected in the 100-year history of the laboratory, but they're going to be really important as we meet our responsibility to the Department of Energy and to the global scientific community to make FRIB superb in every sense of the word. It is that continuity, that sense of purpose, that sense that we are part of that global team, and everyone has their part to play, that makes the laboratory so special, makes FRIB so special, and we hope makes the university so special. So as you hear the stories over the course of the next couple of hours, as you think about what we have done, give yourself a pat on the back for what you did to make that possible. And open your mind to the future in ways that you're still a part of it, no matter where your place in history might have been for the laboratory. So thanks all of you for what you have made possible. And again, we thank the Department of Energy for the confidence that they've placed in us for this next part of our journey, this quest for knowledge, this quest for greatness. Thanks very much.
So as part of Team Cyclotron, Team FRIB, it's my pleasure to introduce Brad Sherrill. He was the chief scientist for FRIB and now has assumed the role as NSCL director.
Attention, this vault is being secured. Please leave.
Please don't leave.
Attention, this vault is being secured. Please leave.
Okay, this isn't a close encounter, and we're not about to fill the hall with radiation, so please stay. Those of you who have done experiments at the laboratories over the past 30 years recognize that's the music that gets played when the vault is, when the experimental area is being closed and an experiment is about ready to begin. So it's a good sound. It's for us experimenters, a happy sound. And it kind of illustrates, I think, the importance that music and art play in everything we do, including science. And so actually we're very fortunate today that we have 7 original compositions to help us celebrate this 50-year event. And so it's my pleasure to introduce the director of the Computer Music Studios at MSU's College of Music, Professor Mark Sullivan, and 2 of his 2 students, who will tell us about these compositions. So please help me welcome Professor Mark Sullivan, Dr. Ben Furman, and Dr. Matthew Shaindorf.
Delighted to be here today, and want to say thanks to everyone at FRIB and NCSL for giving us a chance to participate, and also the chance to talk about what we hope will be an ongoing project. In general, the project involves connecting nuclear physics and the arts. Long term, we hope to see residencies, TED-type talks, STEM to STEAM K-12 projects, but for now, it starts with music. In May of last year, Sandra Kahn, who was recently retired from the university, asked me if I was interested in composing music related to physics. I replied with conviction, emphatically, maybe. Over the summer, several scientists at FRIB generously gave of their time and helped create a dialogue about music and sound, physics, astrophysics. Many ideas emerged, and one thing became clear to me. I wasn't so interested in mechanically or algorithmically turning data into sound, and I also wasn't interested in vague, impressionistic connections with physics. But the actual ideas and concepts that these physicists were working with were absolutely drop-dead exciting. I came to think the potential for creating works that had a tangible connection to the ideas, processes, and concepts of nuclear physics was probably inexhaustible. So the occasion of the celebration of 50 years of the beam seemed a perfect moment for presenting the initial round of outputs of the exploration of connections between music and nuclear physics. Today, with the contribution of these 2 graduates of MSU composition program, one who several years ago wrote an extended work based on quantum theory, and the other who has a long-standing interest in the relationship between the arts and sciences. With them, we will present these 7 works which were created specifically for this occasion. The works are not typical music. They don't have hummable tunes or dance rhythms. They're not even what you would hear on the radio or probably the concert hall. But each of them is a composed sound miniature that was created in relation to ideas or concepts related to physics and hopefully is a step towards thinking about a productive relationship between the arts and physics. The first of these pieces connects to something called the chart of nuclides, which many of you may be familiar with. As you see, it includes the year of discovery at the top, and along the side, there's a chart of various methods of discovery which are in colors. Each of us has created a work which connects to this chart, and through the course of the program, you'll hear those. The first one is my response and reflects the overall flow from lighter nuclides with fewer protons to heavier nuclides. It reflects the core of stability surrounded by expanding areas, less stable in its rhythms. Overall, it uses instrumental color to reflect the way the methods of discovery flow through the chart, starting slowly, sparse, dropping lower, expanding rapidly, jumping back to previous areas or even higher areas, and filling and expanding horizontally until we reach the present.
So I'm holding a copy of the book written by University Distinguished Professor Sam Austin, Up From Nothing. It's an impressive, remarkable work, and so I'm very happy to introduce Professor Sam Austin to talk about his book. Please help me welcome Sam Austin.
I want to begin by just saying a few words about how that book came to be. It started after I retired 15 years ago, and I thought, I hadn't done any account of a journal, nor had I written anything about my scientific career on paper, and I thought I should do that. And I thought, probably vainly, that maybe my kids and grandkids might be interested in that story. So I started to write, and by 2006, I had a 200-page manuscript, partly about science, partly about personal life. The next step was when Henry Blosser left the laboratory, and I took upon the job of sorting his office. Now, those of you who have seen that office know that it was mostly paper. And I spent perhaps 3 months going through things and thought I had finished when I heard that there were 38 more boxes in dead storage. And after another month, I'd finished that, and indeed there were a lot of interesting things there that I thought could be a part of the overall story. Then when we began to plan this event, it seemed clear that I should really take these two parts, the part of my recollections that was about the laboratory and what I learned in Henry's office, and what I could also persuade others in the laboratory to tell me about it, and make a book. And that ended up being the Up From Nothing. What I want to do in the next few minutes, though, is say a few words about things we might learn from that history that made the lab successful in that time, and also probably and hopefully and certainly, I think, will make it more successful in the future. So I've listed four lessons, and the first one is that there's often a crooked road to success, and this is really the origin of the cyclotron laboratory. When John Hanna became president, and then later when MSU joined the Big Ten in 1949, it became clear that MSU was not competitive among its academic peers. And Hanna, in his usual style, which was to do something, did something. And he was thinking at that time that big science might be a way to go forward for the physics department and for the university. And as a result, it turned out that very soon MSU joined the MURA, the Midwestern Universities Research Association, whose task was to find the next accelerator for the Midwest, next nuclear particle physics accelerator. That was an amazing thing because it cost MSU $120,000 to join that organization, and they had no particle physics at all. But it then turned out that within about less than a year, there was a position in physics department for someone who did particle physics, and the department hired Joe Ballum. He, I think, realized that particle physics could not make a splash at MSU, and turned to pushing forward the invention of another accelerator, which we could build, and the choice of that accelerator turned out to be a cyclotron. The university then, in a rather fast form, tried to hire the people that had this cyclotron project, and they approached two very senior people who turned us down. Now that was extraordinarily lucky, because it was then possible to attract Henry Blosser to the MSU, and he turned out to be the ideal person to turn this idea into reality. So I think it's true that life is almost a crooked path. Hanna aimed at particle physics, he got nuclear physics, and eventually MSU got FRIB. So it's crooked, but you should do something. So that's item one, I think. Second thing is something we'll all face as FRIB is turned from paper plans into real on-the-floor hardware. And the main thing to think about there is that transition from plans to hardware is difficult, and there will be problems and setbacks. And the only question is, how do you deal with those problems and setbacks? Sometimes they're just a flash in the pan. For example, I show here on the right a picture which is what happened when we inadvertently dumped the energy in the K500 superconducting coil into the air without a resistor to carry the load. And it led to an arc which burned holes in lots of things. For example, in the power supply cabinets. And as Blosser characterized it, it was a fire department event. But in the end, there was no damage, fortunately, except to this trivial piece of hardware. So the second thing that happened, and it was more indicative, I think, of what has to occur, was with the K1200 cyclotron. We were building a second cyclotron, and we planned to couple that to the K500 to make a truly state-of-the-art facility. And we thought it would be easy to build the K1200 because we'd already built one superconducting cyclotron, and what could happen? Well, it turned out a lot could happen. First thing that happened was of the 7 major procurements, 6 came back flawed, which was a major setback and took a lot of time to repair and get it underway. And secondly, and maybe even more important, it turned out that we did not know how to extract the beam from that cyclotron, to take it out into the air and do physics with it. And that turned out to be a very subtle problem. It took over 2 years to solve. And as a result of all this, we were late by 2 years or more. We were over budget by 25% or more. And when our NSF program officer came to visit, he said in a public meeting, "Why should we continue to fund this project, which is so late and so over budget?" Well, that kind of a comment gets your attention. And I think the laboratory at that time reacted in the ideal way. They started to think about what they could do to succeed and not just sit back and say, "Oh boy, we screwed up." So what happened was there was a paradigm change. We decided not to couple the two cyclotrons for now. We decided to put in place, instead of this first cyclotron, a very capable ion source that we had not yet built, but we assumed its characteristics were good enough, and we went forward. A lot of other things didn't get done at that time, but this thing worked. So I think the idea here is you're going to, as we put the FRIB hardware in place, we will have problems, and we just have to solve them. And you dare not give up and say, "Well, I can only solve it if I get money from everybody." To think of new ways. And the third item is one I think that governs the lab and led to its long-term, made it thrive long-term, even though many other laboratories were closed in the interim. And that is that it's crucial to take the long view. And by that I mean you have always to be aware of what should come next. Where's the good science? And once you've decided what that is, then you should pursue the way to pursue it. Now, this sounds like a no-brainer, but in real life it's hard, because to build a new facility takes maybe 10 years. And that means you have to start thinking and building while you're still using your old facility. And in the history of this laboratory, sometimes between you even finish the previous facility. So it's a complicated change also because, of course, you're moving into a new research area, and the people who work there are not experienced. So they have to assume they can do it. You cannot fear change. I think the laboratory has been very good in this characteristic of always thinking ahead and always trying to do the next good thing. So it carries with it, though, certain characteristics. You have to be daring, and you can't fear change, and you have to assume you can do it. The last thing is persistent pays, and I don't have much time to even talk about that, but I just want to say that the time that FRIB the laboratory started thinking it should compete for the FRIB accelerator, there were very few who thought the odds were greater than 1 in 10, and some thought that was an overestimate. So with that, I'll leave it. I hope those lessons are useful to us in the future.
I'm delighted to be here today. I'm a composer, and in writing music, I tend to look for influences outside of my discipline. And so in talking with the physicists here at the cyclotron and the FRIB, I've been able to draw a lot of parallels between different techniques that I use and their work, specifically with the process of accelerating, collision, and then in-flight separation, taking a cloud of particles and zeroing in on the one isotope that you actually are trying to create and capture. And that is the basis of this piece. I use a technique called granular synthesis, which is remarkably similar. I'm creating a swarm of different sonic particles that are flying around and then filtering everything down until only a handful are left. So thank you, and I hope you enjoy it.
Thank you, Ben. On page 53 of Sam's book is a great set of pictures of the original 6 faculty members for the nuclear science department. And these people are really were the visionaries who set the stage for the science and for what came after. And I'm extremely pleased to say that all 6 of them are here today. And you'll get to see them all, and they'll all have an opportunity to either read from the book or say something. Please help me in welcoming 6 faculty members in order they appear on the page. Hugh McManus, Professor Hugh McManus, Professor Walter Benenson, Professor Aaron Golonsky, Professor Gary Crawley, again Professor Sam Austin, and Professor Ed Cashy.
I'm going to read some pages from the book. I've been talking to my dogs and practicing it. In early January 1965, the completed Ds were being mounted, and the remainder of the month was spent completing all the many connections from the cyclotron to the surrounding world. Electrical control lines, water lines, remote drives for radio frequency tuning, beam probes, the source of the ions to be accelerated, its power and control lines, and many more small items. By the evening of January 1965, all was in place. This is not the night before Christmas. And in front of the large crowd of the interested, students, wives, children, and girlfriends, the startup began. The magnet, trim coils, and ion source were turned on, and the radio frequency warm-up began. But in a few minutes, a severe internal water leak interrupted the process. Similar problems occurred for the next 10 days, and by a February 11 startup attempt, not one visitor was present. This attempt went exceptionally smoothly. With the computed settings, the beam was soon at the maximum radius. Less than 3.5 years after funding was received in October 1961, the cyclotron had achieved initial operation. This was a remarkable achievement, especially since it took place in a university with little experience in handling significant technical construction projects, and in a department that at the beginning of the project had essentially none of the infrastructure necessary to build an accelerator. The source of this success must be attributed principally to Henry Blosser, who had become a force to be reckoned with. He combined strong technical skills and attention to detail with impatience and an ability to attract and work with talented people, some of whom had strong personality quirks. Not me. He was willing to confront anyone, including MSU's President Hanna, whose actions or lack of he felt stood in the way of the success of the cyclotron project. For example, considering lack of parking at the new laboratory, which he felt was an obstacle to morale, Blosser wrote the following to President Hanna: I submit that there is something exceedingly inept about a policy which will provide $250 to furnish a man's office with steel case furniture and not spend $100 to give him a parking place from which he can get to that office without walking in deep mud or down the middle of a busy thoroughfare for an extended distance. I can state with certainty that every staff member in this building would overwhelmingly prefer wooden furniture and a parking place than steel furniture and mud. I can also state with certainty that it is excruciatingly irritating to make an inadvertent step in which the mud goes over one's shoe tops. Hannah sent the Secretary of the Board of Trustees, Jack Breslin, to talk to Blosser, and he didn't get the parking immediately, but he did. During the preparation of this account, I spoke informally with many people about Blosser. Those who were in mid-level campus administration at that time told me several times that the word was, "Don't say no to Henry Blosser." In his interactions with others in the MSU and NSF administrative chain, he was demanding or charming, depending on his assessment of that person's reactions. His success in bringing a welcome project to MSU had raised his status with President Hanna, and for him, many bureaucratic procedures were expedited. Yeah.
So Luana mentioned backstories, and I have so many that I don't know if I can keep them all in the 30 minutes I've been allocated. Don't worry, Brad.
Not worried.
Brad was my graduate student, so I can always send him back to his office to rewrite a chapter of his thesis. Actually, this is the second time I've heard Sam make a presentation on physics history. The other one was last April when we went to a celebration of what would have been our major professor's 100th birthday. And Sam presented the prehistory of Wisconsin nuclear physics before the tandem. He did an outstanding job there also. I think he's really found his true calling at last. Actually, I really don't have time to do all the backstories. Instead, I'll do the backstory of the title, Up From Nothing. In fact, I'll do the backstory of nothing. Okay? Now, I have to give a little history of myself for you to understand. I was a postdoc in France, and I had thought that I could get a job easily back in the US. If you guys don't know this, there were a lot of jobs available at that time, and I wasn't worried. But what I didn't realize was the fact that it cost the equivalent of $10,000 to fly back to the US, and no university would interview me. So I knew I had to wait a year and then make a kind of a tour around the US to find a job. So I went to the director of ISN and I said, "What happens, can I stay another year?" And he said, "Well, actually, you have a permanent job. We don't have postdocs." So this was in Strasbourg, so I right away started learning Alsatian and was just planning to stay there. And then it was really good for me there. I had 2 accelerators working, and I was a computer expert there because I had had 1 week of Fortran, which was just released and nobody else had, so I was considered the great. I wanted to be a professor, and it turns out in France you can't be a professor at the time unless you're a French citizen. So just when I had my first lesson in Alsatian, Henry Blosser showed up and started telling me his vision. 1 week later I had an offer, and a week after that I'd accepted, and I was on my way to Michigan. Okay, so now I get to the point. What does nothing really mean? Well, when I showed up on the campus September 1st, 1963, there was nothing. There wasn't even a building, although Henry told me I had to get there quickly to help with the first beam. There wasn't even a building to put the beam into, to build a cyclotron. But those of you who do nuclear physics can't imagine this. There was nothing in the lab even when it was finished. None of the things we can just borrow, no stands, no photo tubes, no nothing, okay? And so that's an extreme nothing. which we had a battle the first couple of years. And I also realized, how was I ever going to get anything done? I was an untenured young faculty member, and I went in to see Henry, and he assigned me the following jobs. Actually, I left out a lot. He said, I want you to design the trim coil power supply, build the extraction system, design the beam tubes, and the pumping stations, and the experimental stations, and the beam boxes. And I said, okay, I hope you've got some people to help me. He said, well, actually not. So he did one thing, though. He said, you can go out to Berkeley where they have designers and you can talk to them, and he arranged for me to go out there. And each of the projects he gave me, there was a whole room of engineers working on. And I was a bit discouraged at that time. But somehow I never thought about going back to France or looking for a new job. I'll tell you why later. One more thing, it sounds like an uninteresting story. I found a scintillating tube in the physics department. And I said, okay, I have to see if we're going to have radiation with the first beam. And so I borrowed it from the physics department. There was none in the cyclotron. And when I turned it on, it worked for only a second and then turned off. And the reason was it wasn't grounded. Okay, so now comes the story of what happened during the 10 days that Aaron referred to. One thing I should really mention that we had at the cyclotron that many other places didn't, and it's not in Sam's book, it's called beer. We had a lot of beer. Henry was a fraternity boy at University of Virginia, and he liked to drink beer. We had beer at faculty meetings, we had beer at seminars, we went out for beer after work, and so I got to know the people really well. The job of the seminar chairman, for example, was to go and buy the beer, which was served between the presentation and the question session. Okay, so I showed up, I had this photo tube, but the one thing I had is I was completely awed by Blosser. I never ran into anybody like him. I couldn't believe he was only 8 years older than me. It seemed like he had all the wisdom and knowledge, and I felt like a really young boy who knew nothing. So I started trying to design things, and I had to draw them by hand. There was a guy named Norvell Mercer in the shop. We all miss him a lot. He was a great guy. He agreed to make my designs from my hand-sketched drawings, although he told me once that the bold circle should really be inside the flange, not outside. Some of you know what that means. Okay, so here's what happened during those 10 days. We got the thing put together. It wasn't leaking, but when the RF was turned on, the beam only went a half a turn. And Blosser spent days looking through the plexiglass window trying to figure out what happened. And he said to me, well, I asked him, I said, Henry, what's happening? You look completely lost. He said, I don't know what's happening, Walt. The beam goes half a turn and disappears into the dummy D. So I said, Henry, it's like my photo tube. You're charging the thing up. It's not grounded. He said, oh, Walt, great. We lifted the top. We put in a choke on the dummy D. And we turned on the cyclotron. As you say, nobody was there. And immediately the beam started going around. And I became a great hero. Now I'm going to tell you the true story of the true story, which I promised to tell Henry when we're both rocking back and forth at the old physicist home somewhere, to tell him what really happened. So after we went out for beer, after this easily operating cyclotron, Bill Johnson, who was a nuclear physicist but an RF crazed, a electronics crazed physicist, he was the RF guy. And we went out and Bill said to me, Walt, I promise I won't tell anybody if you don't tell anybody. So we made that promise. And what actually happened when we got the beam is that Bill had discovered during the shutdown that he was operating in the wrong mode the whole time. The two cyclotrons had to be push-pull, and he was running them push-push, or maybe it was the other way around, the two Ds. And so once he realized that, immediately we got beam, and as far as I know, Henry never knew that. Okay, now I really want to say a lot about Henry, but I hear other people saying the same thing, so I'll cut this short. You know, those of us who think of us as tall, we hate talking to taller people. And those of us who consider ourselves to be smart, we really hate dealing with really smarter people. And Henry was both taller than me and smarter than me. And this made for a very uncomfortable situation for me all the time. I never won an argument, and he micromanaged everything. And anything I signed, he went over and sent back. I did trick him once, and I was planning to tell him this also at in the old physicist home. I did trick him once and had a small victory. I had the most unpleasant job of assigning offices to the faculty. And if those of you who've been administrators know, that's the thing you want to do least. And I made criteria, and I made this beautiful plan. I knew if I gave it to him, he would change something, but it was perfect. So I changed it. In fact, I interchanged those two guys right there and handed it back to Henry, and Henry said, wouldn't it be better if Gary, Crawley, and Golonsky switched? I said, oh, you're right, Henry. So that's how we got that. Okay, so I'm finishing up. Henry micromanaged the lab, but he did not micromanage us. That's the important thing. We were given complete freedom within the budget to do what we wanted to. And that's in contrast to all the other places we could have gone to. For example, as Hannah said, down the road, meaning Ann Arbor, there was a cyclotron and a history of nuclear physics going back to Lawrence's cyclotron, which he built a second one there. But the professor didn't try to deal with the administration, but he did tell the faculty to do his research, and the thing closed. And Henry was just the opposite. He stood up for us against the university, and we were like children, essentially, because we never had to worry about that. So the other places where we could have gone to had bought equipment identical. So there were maybe 10 labs that had the same stuff. They were soon mining a depleted mine of information. I mean, all the experiments they could do were being done somewhere else. Being at MSU was great. Okay, so, and you know, he pushed us forward. I see these 5 people here. It reminded me when we had the inauguration of the K500. He made all the PIs sit on the thing during the entire presentation. Remember that? I found it kind of embarrassing, but he knew for the lab to be a success, he had to push us forward, and we had to be world recognized. So he was that way. Okay, so you have to ask yourself, how did we attract such really good people here? It certainly wasn't because of the climate or the food or the university, which was not at all preeminent at that time. We all came here because of Henry Blosser's vision. And because of this vision, which was a unique understanding of how a cyclotron could work, we were able to do things that other people never dreamed possible. And this is kind of a joke that only they will get, but we always referred to the cyclotron as a powerful tool. It got to be a cliche, right? Everything was a powerful tool. And we had it. We really did have a powerful tool. Okay, so now here's the final end. We're in an era now where everything is named after donors. For example, we have a baseball stadium that's named after a law school. And last summer I was operating in an operating room which was dedicated to one of the Koch brothers. But in physics, we've always done a better job than that. We have the Fermi lab, we have the Lawrence Berkeley lab, we have the Rutherford lab, we have the Cavendish lab. And I really don't see why some part of the MSU effort shouldn't be named after Henry Blosser, because he had the vision that allowed all this to happen. Thank you.
I'm Ed Cashy, and I'll be reading at first in an abbreviated version from the book, which Sam put together. These early years set the cyclotron lab on its future path. The success of the K50 cyclotron, of the experimental apparatus, and of scientific results gave the laboratory credibility for its later expansion. Equally important for the long-term viability of the lab was an evolving lab culture. It arose from Henry Blosser's view, some of it arose from early faculty and staff, a lot from funding limitations that made the faculty and their graduate students into operators and technicians. The result was a culture built on pride and a view that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Some of the lab practices were to give senior staff strong influence on lab decision, to give research staff free rein on the choice of research, to support the building of forefront experimental apparatus, and to involve senior staff directly in both machine operation and apparatus development, and also to encourage interaction between experimental and theoretical faculty members. Many of the faculty interaction played out in the hallways, as all the offices were 11 foot by 11 foot, much too small to have a big gathering. At the Friday meetings at Blosser House, everyone sat on the floor with beer in hand and did lab business. Blosser had a strong personality and often got what he wanted, but often he did not. Important items had informal votes that decided issues. Even those who were opposed, including Blosser sometimes, bought into this decision because everyone knew that they had been considered and decided. Well, I have a couple of stories that reflect what I just read. One of them dealt with the following thing. One of the early graduate students, named Larry Cole, who ended up being a successful CEO, in the course of an experiment, Larry had measured that the beam energy was 27.2 million electron volt. This was the energy of the protons. But Larry was perplexed because the computer's printout gave the energy to be 29.0 MeV, a fairly big discrepancy. So he told Blosser. And so Henry, of course, immediately, he says, that can't be, there must be a mistake. And so they started talking about it. And Larry just showed him that they had made two measurements, completely different measurements, and in each case, the energy was 27.2. Henry shook his head, and he walks out. 30 minutes later, he comes back, and he says, where did you set the bump? So Larry and I look at each other. What's the bump? It turns out the bump is a little coil that kicks the beam out of the cyclotron, and we had set it where the beam got out of the cyclotron much earlier than would have been the proper thing to do. But after all, we were very young operators and technicians and did not do very much about it at the time. The net result, however, that everybody, all the professors and all the grad students now knew what the bump was. At one of the research facilities, at one of the research meetings, one of our early postdoc, Barry Predum, bragged that he could tell all kinds of beers apart, that he loved Schlitz and he hated Budweiser. So Henry immediately challenged him to a blind test. Barry, of course, agreed, and then he even said that he would stand on his head if he failed. Well, on that particular night, Barry ended up standing on his head because it was Budweiser that he liked. Well, one final little story. Blosser really loved growing tomato, and he was very good at it. He grew some of the most beautiful yellow and red tomatoes I've ever seen. And I asked him once, can you tell them apart? And he says, absolutely. And I said, how about a blind test? Well, after carefully testing a series of 4 samples, Henry selected sample 1 and sample 3 as being red, and sample yellow 2 and 4 as being 1 and 3 as red, 2 and 4 as yellow. As you have guessed by now, I gave him all 4 red samples. That wasn't fair, Henry says, but we had a good laugh about it.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate Sam again on doing such a wonderful job with telling the history of the cyclotron lab here at MSU. Actually, I'd like to begin by telling a story about Sam. It's actually Sam's story that he's told before, and I hope he doesn't mind. But as you may know, Sam came here to MSU from Stanford, and he'd only been here a couple of days when he found a note on his desk that read, "Please don't leave dirty coffee cups on the desk." Signed, Henry. So Sam didn't realize till quite a bit later that the janitor, perhaps an overly conscientious janitor, was also named Henry. He thought, boy, they really run a tight ship here. Well, personally, I've always found the lab extremely welcoming and agreeable. I think part of the reason for that was that we all realized at that stage that we would either succeed or fail together. And so I think this led to a real spirit of cooperation between all the members of the lab, and I think that's still true today. One of the things that the world was really, the lab and the world was very different 50 years ago. As a lot of the older, or maybe I should say more experienced physicists will remember, the physicists really did everything to do with the machine. They not only worried about the experimental equipment and setting up the experiment, but we also, as was common everywhere, the physicists ran the accelerator, fixed problems, and had to do the whole thing. Now, you also have heard that there was quite a lot of beer drinking and a lot of parties around at that stage too. And I do remember once there was a party at Henry's house, as was common, and we got a call from Henry got a call from the lab saying they were having trouble with the beam. They couldn't figure out what was the problem. And so he decided he would try to help by going into the lab and try to solve the problem. And Ed Cashy, as was also very common, decided to make a bet on this. That he bet that Henry couldn't fix the beam within 10 minutes of entering the lab. So the whole party drove over to the labs, only a few minutes drive, and stood around while Henry pulled the iron source, did whatever he did, maybe fixed replaced a bent filament or something, and within the 10-minute limit, just succeeded in beating Ed's bet. So it was kind of that spirit was something that was really, I think, very impressive. Well, time passed. The K500 was proposed and funded, and the K50 then had to be shut down because the vault and the beamlines had to be reconfigured for the new machine. I think actually that led to an increase in productivity of the lab because a lot of the physicists who at that stage were able to have time to stop and write up the papers about the work they'd been doing. The other thing that happened was I think that a lot of us moved to be users at other labs, and I think that also was a beneficial aspect to it. Then finally, in September 1st, 1982, the first beam from the K500 was extracted, and Henry put the following note up on the notice board. I think it's interesting to see this note. It's as is very characteristic of Henry, it's full of exclamation marks and underlinings. I think Henry, you can, by looking at it and reading it, you can sense the excitement that he felt about the beam and also how much he was willing to give credit to other people, and also the fact that there was a certain amount of relief, I think, that things were finally, that the beam was finally extracted. So the note, it's a bit hard to read, I think, from there, so I'll just read it out to finish up. It says, "To everyone, from Henry, re big events. The beam is out, exclamation mark underlined. 106 MeV deuterons with good characteristics, an energy record for isochronous cyclotrons, and it's our lowest normal energy, so much more to come. NSF and DOE are very, very pleased. Letting the world know there'll be a press conference in the East High Bay at 1 p.m. today. Anyone interested is welcome. And tomorrow at 4 o'clock, same place, it'll be my biggest pleasure to pop a cork for each and every one of you, the staff of this lab, the best there is. We did it." Thank you.
Let's thank these remarkable people again for their presentations, but also their tremendous contributions to the laboratory. Thank you. Time to get off. Ready?
Okay,
we'll follow them.
Yeah, follow that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
This is really wonderful.
Okay.
Great job, guys. Go ahead.
I'm not sure my stories will be nearly as entertaining, but as a composer, I find myself in a unique position. I've always had an interest in the sciences. My brother actually is a postdoc in physical chemistry, and he and I have shared ideas over the years. He's inspired several of my compositions, and in return, I have introduced him to several symphonies and the wonders of good beer. So, the particular piece that I'm presenting right now is called The Atomic Weight. It borrows from the nomenclature of atomic weight, but uses the homophone weight instead, because every good composer loves a pun. The progression of isotope discovery methods detailed in this video is represented through the metaphor of the equal tempered acoustic scale as a substitute for the pitches found in a given harmonic series. Successive methods of isotope discovery are represented as each new overtone pitch is introduced at decreasing temporal intervals. A tipping point is finally reached corresponding with the inaugural use of projectile fragmentation at MSU's and SCL. At this point, the sonic build through the equal tempered harmonic series gives way to uncontrolled electronic noise as more and more rare isotopes continue to be discovered. And again, the title is a play on the homophones because puns. Enjoy.
Thank you, Matthew. The research at the laboratory was mostly for fundamental purposes to try to understand the origins of the nuclear force and the history of elements and the universe. But there were also important other outcomes from the research. And among Henry Blosser's visionary aspects was also this realization that the technology developed for nuclear physics could also be applied in other areas. In the 1990s, he was involved in development of a cyclotron for medical purposes. And so I'm very pleased that we have today his son, Gabe Blosser, who is an accelerator design engineer at Ionics Corporation, and he will tell us a little bit about that story. So please help me welcome Gabe Blosser.
Hello. I can't see anybody with all the lights, but here we go. Hello, thank you for inviting me to speak at 50 years of Beam Celebration. I'm here to honor my dad, Henry Blosser, who died about 2 years ago. And I hope that I achieve that with a tale of how I came to be a particle accelerator engineer. I am following in my father's footsteps. It wasn't my plan, nor did I think it was his either. It just worked out that way after 30 years of professional effort on my part. Henry, at a young age, had told his father he didn't want to take over the family chicken processing plant, and instead he wanted to study mathematics. I have read through Sam Austin's book on the history of the lab, and there are numerous stories that I have direct experience with, and some that have brought me new awareness of my father's legacy. Sam, I think your book is well done, and thank you for all of your efforts in creating it. At a young age, I had cyclotron-related things staring me in the face. The wooden crates that the K50 cyclotron magnet steel got shipped in ended up stacked up 3 boxes high in the side yard. Our neighbors must have been horrified. Complete with a tunnel to get in the bottom box. It was a glorious fort, and many battles were waged with all the Bailey neighborhood kids taking part. This was in the early 60s, before shipping container liability was even thought up. No warning labels. Caution, long-term exposure can cause cyclotron-itis. Don't tell the NSF. I was always going to the machine shop with wonderful wooden floors at the lab to watch Henry fix something for the house. I first learned about epoxy when Henry made a desperate attempt to glue some family heirloom china back together. It was not well received by my mother. Seems like they hadn't invented clear epoxy yet, and the dark glue didn't go too well with the white porcelain cup. Henry was in the doghouse that night. As I got older, I started to have my own projects to attempt at the lab shop. Norval Mercer, everybody loved Mercer, we called him, who ran the shop, spent time with me. I have vivid memories of his 20-minute dissertation on how to operate a hacksaw. He went on and on and on. It's something like, become one with the saw and don't work so hard and it will get done sooner, Obi-Wan. Late one night, as I was hurrying over to the lab shop to do something on my own, I got pulled over for speeding by an MSU police officer. He asked where I was going, and I answered, followed up by, "Is your dad Henry Blosser?" With my answer of yes, I was quickly sent on my way. Thanks, Henry. It's one of the few times in my life I got out of a speeding ticket that I really did deserve. There was always physics meetings that Henry attended. He would sometimes bring all or part of his family to these meetings in places around the world. With his one-year sabbatical at CERN in Switzerland being the most impressive for me when I was in the 6th grade. Every month or so, there would be meetings in our living room, as mentioned in Sam's book. As a fledgling, and by other people here, as a fledgling teenage mechanic, I interrupted one of these meetings one summer afternoon when I managed to remove a fan belt with my wrist while the car was running in the driveway. My long-sleeve shirt had gotten caught by the belt, and I came running into the living room screaming. Walter and Ed, do you remember it? Remember that meeting? Yeah, okay. The meeting quickly adjourned and Henry whisked me off to the ER. The first time I actually laid hands on a cyclotron, I was about to leave our Beach Street house in my car with a Hobie Cat sailboat trailer behind it to go sailing on Lake Lansing. When I heard the house phone ringing inside, no cell phones then, so it was a miracle I heard it and answered it. I had a car full of friends, one of which was an attractive young lady who I'm sure I was trying to impress. It was Henry, and he was desperate. There were 2 small vacuum leaks on the K500 cryostat. Bob Welton, the lab guru welder, had been up for 20 hours straight and had finally staggered off, telling Henry, "I'm going home." There was a physics conference in a day or two, and Henry was trying to make a milestone to announce at the conference. And that type of activity, that was not the first time, it was not the last time. There were always big pushes to try and get ready for a conference. I had just completed a welding course at LCC. I was Henry's only hope in getting it done. I climbed up on the cryostat, trying to remember all the things my instructor had been telling me, and flipped my hood down and hit the pedal and got it done. As all this is going on, there was a carload of friends in the parking lot watching through the east high bay door. They thought the cryostat looked like some weird satellite. Jumping ahead to a year after college graduation as a mechanical engineer, and I was working at an entry-level design engineering job in Seattle for a lousy company. I had a phone call with Henry, and I told him I was wanting to start a business, but didn't have a clue what the business was going to do. A month earlier, the K500 had gotten beam out, and the publicity from that had generated a phone call from a Dr. Bill Powers in Detroit asking Henry if he would build him a machine for neutron radiation therapy. The world's first superconducting cyclotron for radiation therapy project was started because of those phone calls. I moved back to East from a life in the Pacific Northwest, thinking I would be here a few years and move back. Boy, was I wrong. Now I'm really in it. My brother Emmanuel, Henry, and me, and various consultants and numerous experts from this lab set about to do something that had never been done. It did not just happen. Back to Sam's point about keep trying. We had to rebuild everything, and I mean everything, at least 2 or more times. It went on for years. From reading Sam's book about Henry was taking a lot of heat over this, but he kept it from me and my brother. We were having enough trouble without having to deal with that. I have a lot more respect for the unbelievable tenacity of my dad to tackle and complete a project. One of the features of the medical machine was that it had to rotate. John Purcell, a longtime lab consultant on superconducting magnets, suggested how to come up with a valveless venting system for the helium boil-off gas. Just wrap some pipes around it, was his approach. Well, it wasn't that easy, but I'm proud to say that I'm the guy that figured out the intricate system of pipes that had to be put in a very precise order to get it done. I was no longer a green engineer fresh out of school. I had arrived. By this time, a few years into the project, if we hadn't found a way, it would have killed it. Henry somehow always found a way with the help of everybody involved at the lab. I'm in awe of this as I look back on those years. The medical project took a toll on my family relationships. Working with a father and brother was very hard at times. I worked on the neutron machine about 10 years. So much for moving back to Seattle in a few years' time. After the neutron machine was installed at Harper Hospital in Detroit and started treating patients, I moved on to start a manufacturing company. 15 years later, 2008 hit, and I closed my doors and went looking for work. After moving through a number of jobs, I've ended up back in the cyclotron business, in my father's footsteps. It wasn't by plan, but here I am. There are now many superconducting cyclotrons treating cancer. They're mostly proton machines. Between Mevion and Varian, I'm guessing there's 10 to 20 machines around the world. The Varian machine was Henry's last project before his mind started to go. And here's the famous picture of Henry and Bill on the gantry in the S800 spectrograph pit, taken not too long before we shipped it to Detroit. Okay, here's a test. Some of you know the new answer to this question. Some will know the old one. How many superconducting cyclotrons are there in our community? 1? 2? Don't know? Don't care? Well, as my father has done in the past, I'm proud to be able to stand here today and announce publicly on behalf of Ionetics, the company I'm currently working for here in Lansing, that the new answer is 3. There is a new 12 MeV superconducting cyclotron that first produced a batch of nitrogen-13, which is a short-lived isotope that is used by PET scanners for taking pictures of the heart a few weeks ago here in Lansing. It is a prototype machine, but it will soon be cloned into many machines that will be shipped all over the world and installed in hospitals. It is the world's smallest superconducting cyclotron. 50 years of beams. My current endeavor is a direct result of 50 years of beam. We could not have achieved what we are doing if it was not for all the hard work and determination of a multitude of people over the years, especially my dad. Henry, here's to you in my father's footsteps. Thank you.
In the coming work, I wanted to reflect the character of isotopes and chose the simplest elements that one could choose that have one proton, or at least the first 3 versions of that. I thought of these as, musicians call it, variations of hydrogen, and I tried to create approximations to the changes created in a constant configuration of elements when a new set of elements is added. In addition, I wanted to reflect on the smallness of the nuclide within the atom and suggest, by creating 2 layers of sound, each at the extreme range of audibility, an element which is similar to a description people often make of that relationship between the nuclide and the atom, which is, it's mostly empty.
Thank you, Mark. Well, one of the great things about science is, of course, the discoveries. And the opportunity is to share those discoveries with not just other scientists, but also with the broader public. And that also is an important part of what we do. So I'm actually very pleased to tell you that we had received funding from the American Physical Society and also other departments and colleges on MSU campus to develop a video game to describe and show the process of isotope production. And so we're fortunate today to have a kind of world premiere of this video game. And so I'd like you to help me welcome NSCL Outreach Coordinator Zach Constant and Dr. Andrew Dennis from the Department of Media and Information of the College of Communication Arts and Sciences. Welcome.
Thanks. I'm not sure how we're supposed to follow everybody has been before, but here goes. We do really amazing work at the laboratory next door. It's kind of hard to argue. And we love sharing it with people, and we do all kinds of things, right? Tours, camps, festivals. The problem is, just in this country alone, there are millions of people that, of course, we're not going to reach because they can't get here, or we can't get to them. There's a lot of students, right? A lot of pre-college students who are being deprived of rare isotope research. They're just not hearing about the cool careers that they could have. I'm sure you all agree that you would rather be doing this. So here's the thing. A couple years ago, we realized that what we really should be doing is connecting with people in a new way that's a really great opportunity, which is gaming. And almost 2 years ago, we decided to we joined forces with the Games for Entertainment and Learning Laboratory here on campus at the Communications Arts and Sciences. And they develop games. So I'd like to welcome Andrew Dennis from the lab. He is one of the faculty in Communications Arts and Sciences, and he's also the director of this game. So like Brad said, this celebration is a nice opportunity to introduce to the world Isotopia, not the final name. Okay, so we're gonna, anyway, we have a video here that we're gonna show. Go ahead and cue it up. There you go. There you go. Thanks to the Gel Lab, who's done a wonderful job on a shoestring making this game. And the credits are, of course, really important. Like he said, American Physical Society started this off, but we got contributions from a lot of different units around campus. So we really thank all of them. And Andrew's going to talk about gameplay and how it was developed and why. So go ahead.
Thanks, Zach. Let's see. I believe this mic should be hot, but we got it going? Great. Thank you again, Zach. Hello, everyone. I'm going to show you a little sample of gameplay today from our game, Isotopia. Again, final name because the App Store is very finicky about what you name things, especially if something has that name. The challenge for us was we wanted to create a game that would showcase to students in the general public the whole table of isotopes. Now, as a designer, creating a game with 3,000 levels is very, very difficult, as well as being able to showcase individual isotopes down to the smallest detail. So in this game, you can create every single known isotope that's out there with a very generously created table of data made for us by the wonderful folks at the cyclotron. So I'd like to take you through some sample of the gameplay. The first phase here, of course, is ionization. Here, the player taps on the screen to shoot beams to knock electrons off of the isotope, thus letting us accelerate it. Rather than making the game too difficult because it needed to have a broad audience, we opted for time-based mechanics where when the phase ends, you move into the next phase of acceleration, letting everyone from an elementary school student to an expert gamer play a fun experience that would encourage them with getting higher points and beating their best score. As soon as this phase is complete, I think in this gameplay I just barely made it there. The next phase here is acceleration. Here you tap the left and right sides of the screen to steer your isotope around a beam. I'm trying to hit the green good areas of the magnet. Rather than focusing on the specific engineering or the specific technology, which can change frequently and update over time, we wanted to keep something that was more like an abstract metaphor so that when we go to schools or talk about the cyclotron, we can give them a framework for discussing what happens and when, as well as providing them a fun game to play. The next phase here is where your player is actually going to tap and drag through the screen to be able to steer this isotope into a collision. Now, of course, as many of you here know, it's not that easy for two things to collide, especially when things are this tiny and space is that broad. What we want to think about is the metaphor that out of all the particles here, this is the one that hits. This is the one that we're following. This gives the player efficacy and the ability to guide themselves through the game and feel like they're being able to accomplish something. We wanted to provide the metaphor to the player that they are the scientists. That's why we decided to depict this as the science of it rather than showing people in lab coats or trying to show a lab environment. We want the students and middle school students who will play this to feel like they're scientists. Lastly, we get to assembly, where by dragging on neutrons, we can fling them into the center of the target, giving clues to the player about what they need to do to put together their target isotope. Here, instead of timing and it ends, it actually won't end until the player correctly creates the isotope they're looking for. This is so that even though the game will progress, we wanted to make sure every student is creating the ideal situation. Here, I don't have enough neutrons and I have too many protons, and what I'm going to need to do is get an additional proton that's going to come onto the screen in a second so I can knock the extra one off. It's going to pop up in a moment here. Again, wanting to make sure that every student, almost like building models in a chemistry lab, gets the opportunity to put these pieces together. So now I have my last piece, and as soon as the isotope is complete, we go to what I think is the most important screen of this, which is the counting screen. At the end of every gameplay session, we show the player what they've made, and we count up the number of protons and neutrons, so they always get the relationship between what they made and what goes into it before updating all the data on the side of the table. When this all comes back together, we show them where it goes in the entire table of nuclides so that they, as they create it, they expand out the same way that the science was discovered, and they started with what they knew and they expanded their way outward. We tell them what they created, we give them an idea and an update on how they did for their score and their progress, and then we actually go back to the table and show them the new particle that they just created with some interesting information about some facts about it, including its date of discovery. So that's a little sample. This game is going to be going up on the App Store very soon, especially when we figure out a final name for it. But stay tuned. Thank you, Zach. Would you want to wrap up here?
Yeah. So there we go. Finally, an opportunity for players, potentially anywhere, to try rare isotope research for themselves. We're really thrilled about the possibility for this game, especially in schools, maybe in installations in science museums like our very own Impression 5 in town. There's a lot of development we still want to do, but it's coming very soon to the App Store. So watch our website, of course, it'll be announced there, and tell your friends. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
So when I first saw the chart of the nucleotides, I was struck by two things. The first was how many gaps there were, how many there are still left to discover and fill in the holes, as it were. The second thing that I was really interested in is the fact that there are all of these different methods of discovery, of how to detect isotopes and how to go about filling in these gaps. So I created a piece around that. It's created to show the different methods of discovery by pairing each method up with a different type of sound. So you have things like harp, synthesizers, piano, clouds of granular little dots floating around in space, and even a theremin. It also has some additional percussion at the beginning, just to kind of help drive everything forward and just to sort of symbolize the never-ending quest for knowledge and discovery and the human spirit. The name, of course, was taken from the ubiquitous signs in the London Underground that I recently experienced, where if you are ever there, you'll see them everywhere. Mind the gap, don't fall in the holes. Although in this case, falling in the holes would probably be a better outcome than in London.
Thanks, Ben. Well, today marks 50 years of BEAM at Michigan State University. It also marks 50 years of John Bonifiglio. And so I'm very pleased to welcome to the stage our head operations engineer, John Bonifiglio, and he's going to share with us a presentation about the team that really makes all this possible. Happy birthday and welcome, John.
Okay, today is indeed a celebration of 50 years of BEAM at Michigan State University. It is, however, also a celebration of the people that have made that 50 years of BEAM possible. As with any grand idea, there are always visionaries that lead the charge. They are the people who take the initial risk, and they are also the people who receive the greatest recognition, and rightly so. There are others, though, others that take grand ideas from the visionaries and turn them into realities. These people do not always get, but deserve no less recognition. Today is one of the days we recognize those people. They are the people in the audience today. They are the physicists, they are the engineers, designers, and programmers. They are the machinists and welders. They are the electronics technicians, installation specialists, and operators. They are the skilled trades, the contractors, the plumbers, and the electricians. They are the purchasing agents and accountants. They are the administrative professionals, custodians, and managers. And they are the safety professionals that allow us to go home to our families at the end of each day. Some of the people come and go, contributing to but a small part of the 50 years. They are the graduate students, undergrads, postdocs, visiting faculty, professors, and experimenters. Some people come and stay. They choose to make this place their home, spending an entire career here. When some of them finally retire, they are back at work the next day. And some people come and leave too soon, as life calls them away. Theodore Seuss Geisel's famous book, Oh, the Places You'll Go, quips about the places you'll end up when you're starting out in school, a career, or life. For most of us in the room today, the place we ended up is here at NSCL and FRIB. Dr. Seuss also talks about the many different people you'll meet when you get to those places. He says you'll get mixed up with many strange birds as you go. The university is a place with a dizzying array of different people from different cultures, different backgrounds, and different places. These differences may certainly seem strange when we first arrive, but become natural as we work together towards a common goal. He also says, be sure when you step with great care and tact, and remember that life's a great balancing act. I learned the part about tact the hard way. When I arrived here 20 years ago, I had no idea some physicists did not have a sense of humor. It had honestly just never occurred to me. I had cracked a joke one morning in the control room and was met with a stare I hadn't seen since I was a child in Catholic school. Right then and there, I made it one of my personal goals. I was going to bring laughter to the people of physics. After all, if I could bring laughter to Catholic school, how hard could it be to do the same here? As it turns out, Catholic school was a breeze. There they could only send you home with a note. Here they could fire you. So as we celebrate 50 years of BEAM and MSU, please remember, all the grand ideas in the world are only possible when there are people there to implement them. Today is about people, and today is about us. So on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank all of you. Please enjoy this video of just some of the many people that have made 50 years of BEAM at MSU possible. Thank you.
Makes no difference what we become.
Thanks a lot, John, for putting that together. Now we'll welcome back Matthew Shaindorf.
Thank you. Like many in my generation, my first exposure to particle collider technology came from the movie Ghostbusters, as erroneous as that was. Years later, when I found out that it was an actual real thing, and the cyclotron here did much cooler things than defeating Gozer, I began writing music that had to do with this kind of technology. And the next piece is one of those. Callisotope is meshing of the words kaleidoscope and isotope, using the word kaleidoscope, the different colored imagery of different colors to represent different isotopes. In Callisotope, two simple and repetitive musical themes are introduced in counterpoint with each other. They go out of phase and come back into phase, representing particles in a collider. Once they collide, a third theme is introduced, at which point a transition of noise introduces yet another theme and brings about the idea of theme and variations, again, musical analog to what isotopes are, at least from my perspective. So this is Callisotope. I hope you enjoy.
Thank you, Matthew. The laboratory's gone through a number of transitions, K50 to K500 to K1200 to the coupled cyclotron facility, and now on to FRIB. And the person who directed us through the last two of those transitions is Professor Konrad Gelbke. I think there's many words you could associate with Konrad, but certainly two of them are vision and leadership. And this afternoon, we'll have a symposium in honor of Konrad's achievements and contributions that will start at 2 p.m. here in this theater. You're all invited to attend that. So it's my pleasure now to invite to the stage Professor and former director for 23 years, Konrad Gelbke.
Well, after this fantastic program, I was wondering what am I going to say. Michael was smart enough not to give me a clue what this morning would be looking like, so I have to improvise. So I'm going to tell you a couple of stories. One of the stories is what happened actually when I came here. So, I mean, the cyclotron lab was blossoming. They had a world-renowned program. I had read about the beautiful work of Walter Benenson and Ed Cashy. Otherwise, I knew nothing except that Blosser was the best cyclotron designer in the world. So when they were inviting me for an interview, I said, well, I've never been out in Michigan. I'll just give it a shot. And then I read in the airplane what their fantastic plans were. But I was still thinking that I would just end up at MIT. So I interviewed here, and I had two lasting impressions. Blosser is brilliant and intimidating, but absolutely fascinating. And Sam Austin, he was very smart and very nice and absolutely not arrogant. And so I went back to Michigan, to Berkeley, and thought, well, what am I going to do? And then Blosser gave me a call and said, well, just let you know, we measured the fields in the magnet for what is later going to be the K500, and the measurements came down within a fraction of a %. So I thought, the guy knows what he's doing, and I'm going to accept. So I accepted basically within a few weeks and came to Michigan State. Let me fast forward another story. So I'm going to tell you some stories which are not rational. They're sometimes emotional, gut instincts, but this is what sometimes drives you forward as you're moving into the unknown. After, I don't know what it was, perhaps 10 years or so, I got restless, and I had told Sam, I'm going to have my program wrapped up here in Michigan State University within about 3 or 4 years. That was about 38 years ago. But I felt that I needed to go to Germany. I had an offer from Germany. I told Sam, I've just put my acceptance letter to go back to Germany into the mail. And Sam ran over to Henry, and Henry said, can you pull this letter still out of the outbox? Give me 4 hours. So I said, 4 hours, that's fine, because I've been agonizing over that for about a year. So within 4 hours, there was a lot of activities. David Scott was talking to me, and so a lot of emotions. Turns out I never really put the letter back into the box when I stayed. And that was really Henry Blosser and Sam Austin with their absolutely compelling power and knowing which buttons to push with me. So then, fast forward again. One day I was coming back from swimming and doing my exercise, and I tried to sort of stay healthy. And Henry Blosser said, well, Conrad, I would like you to consider running for director of the lab. And said, well, this is really not my plan. I mean, I've really never thought about this. I like to run a research group. Anyway, so as it turned out, the laboratory was sort of electing me to become the next director. And by that time, I really had developed a fantastic love relationship to the laboratory. So I thought, this is good. I mean, we were slated to have a 12.5% increase in budget, and I thought, this is going to be great. So I signed on the acceptance letter from David Scott, and he said, well, Conrad, just to let you know, you're going to have 5 good years and then another 5 bad years, and then you're going to shut down the laboratory. So I said, 5 good years, okay, so we'll work hard to extend this into a little bit more. It turned out David Scott was absolutely wrong. Okay, within a few months, the NSF had decided that they can only afford 1 major nuclear physics laboratory, and we were just walking right into a blizzard, a major NSF review. Bob Redwine mentioned this yesterday evening in the dinner. The fortunate thing is that review committee decided to recommend that the decision which laboratory to close, major NSF-funded laboratory to close, should be delayed in the future. So that was, I think, an awakening. After that, I went to Luana Simon, who was actually, by that time, my new boss. And I told her that we're sort of in a pickle. We need to develop some new plans. We were really research-strapped. The NSF had handed us a 12.5% budget cut, which led to basically the decision, and that was the worst thing I've ever done, of letting 20% of our staff go, and then but keeping everybody else for the whole amount of time, 12 years, employed and developing a future for the laboratory. So she understood what was at stake. I never really ever had to explain anything twice to Luana Simon, and she was very, very supportive. We went into some brainstorming sessions. We had some brilliant ideas what to do. We went to the NSF and were sent home because they would not invest the amount of money which it would take to build what we at that time thought a modern isotope facility. And then Felix, I was in Germany doing some experiments, and Felix developed a new concept, which now is the coupled cyclotron facility concept, which we could realize within the boundary conditions which were set by the National Science Foundation to do. So this gives you an idea. You're going back and forth. There are unexpected things. But one thing I've learned in all these things, you got to think forward, and you have to not give up. Perhaps I should say another anecdote about Henry. So when we had developed the plans for the coupled cyclotron proposal, we invited the NSF to tell them what we're going to do, and I was taken to the side by the NSF funding officer, and he said, well, Conrad, we're really not ready to receive a proposal yet. And so I was completely shattered on the ground because we have worked so hard, and I really didn't know what to do. And Henry just took me aside and said, Conrad, just go with it, okay? If they say no, it's not the last word. Don't take no for an answer. And I think that is something which I took to heart. There have been a lot of setbacks which nobody knows, but we've always looked forward, and we've not taken a no for an answer, and we've really always sort of developed the tools, made the decisions in the community, and that allowed us to build a coupled cyclotron facility. And even before that was done, I was NSAC chairman, and we were sort of thinking about the next generation facility in the United States. And one of the unfortunate things with me is I can't shut up my mouth. Okay, so it turned out that in the meeting I was looking at what the other laboratories were doing, and we were supposed to decide which of them to pick. I said, well, at MSU we probably would do this entirely differently. And so somebody from MIT picked me up on that and said, well, we should really ask MSU to calculate this through. And I absolutely had no clue how to do the calculations. I had sort of a gut feeling what one should do. So I was coming back home and said, I probably jeopardized the future of the laboratory by not keeping quiet and sort of working steadily on what we should do in the future, building a modern fragmentation facility. But we need to make these calculations. And so I was looking to Brad Sherrill and said, Brad, I mean, you know all this stuff, right? I mean, can you just do this? I said, well, so he said, yeah. And by the way, you only have about 2 weeks to get this thing done. And so he was really working hard, and after a couple of days, he was coming back, Conrad, this is really looking good. I can't believe how good this is going to be. Okay, and so we went to Argonne and told them that this is really a very interesting thing. And then Brad was invited by NSAC to make a presentation. It was one of the most remarkable meetings I've ever experienced. There was this entire committee. Brad made the presentation. The chairman of the subcommittee, who was working for NSAC, immediately called a pause. And after that, one of the laboratories, which was in the competition, said, we're withdrawing because obviously this is a brilliant idea. And it led to what is called the RIA paradigm change, which is sort of the foundation of the FRIB laboratory. So all these things were unpredictable, but you always have to sort of think about where do you want to go. The timing was awful for us, because as soon as that was announced, I said, well, MSU is going to be in the race. So I was NSAC chairman, and all of a sudden, I wasn't impartial anymore, so I sent in my resignation. I said, I'm going to work for MSU. Somebody else has to finish all this NSAC business, but this is what we're going to do. And nobody really thought that we had a chance, okay? Nobody had a chance. We had a faculty meeting, and we sort of said, I said, well, we have two choices, okay? I could go to Argonne and build this machine, or we could give it a shot. And a lot of deliberations, and I think Sam said, well, it's just a couple of months, okay, enough, and then you have a decision. And so it was a vote. I sort of became absent of that vote. I really didn't want to participate. Who was for, who was against it. But it turned out unanimous. The faculty, absolutely unanimous, said, we're gonna compete, okay? So this is what they did. And I mean, the rest is really history. I mean, it was uplifting. We had many, many twists and turns, and I don't want to go into all of this, but it was fantastic. We never kept the eye off the ball. One day, and this is my last thing, which is sort of a credit for where we were going. Things that sometimes looked really difficult for us to do. But we always said we really want to build this world-class facility on a university campus where education and research becomes one. One of the persons who's played a very important role, Felix Marty, one day said, "Conrad, I mean, I know what the odds are. Okay, what's your plan B?" And I sort of looked at him and said, "What are you talking about? We have a plan. We're going to play it like a tennis match. And only when the last ball is played, we're going to talk about what our options are." So anyways, the persistence of our faculty, the brilliance of our technical staff really made this all happen. And I was just very fortunate to work with so many good people over the time who all made numerous contributions, which some of them are in Sam's book and some of them are perhaps in the book, in the sequel, which perhaps one day I may write myself if I live long enough. Anyways, thank you very much. It was a privilege to see this all happening. I came back after 4 months to this university, and it was just fantastic, the amount of progress. And Thomas, he's going to lead the laboratory in a brilliant future. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much, Conrad, for those comments. And of course, thank you for everything you have done for the laboratory over many, many years, for your leadership and your vision. You're not off the hook, because today will be plenty more stories about you and your contribution. So that's to come later today. But now I'm happy to welcome back to the microphone Professor Mark Sullivan.
So in this final work, I tried to reflect the forces that are involved in a supernova collapse, forces that lead to a structured but increasingly chaotic, explosive deterioration, which ultimately leads to the formation of an extremely small but also extremely dense star. And the complexity of the explosive-implosive collapse results in a kind of density that's extraordinarily difficult to conceive and actually can't exist in a place like Earth. And reflecting on this requires the full bandwidth of the audio spectrum, even to create a pale suggestion of its nature.
Thank you, Mark. So now we're nearing the end of the program, so I'd like to invite back to the microphone FRIB Laboratory Director Thomas Glassmacher for a few final remarks. Thomas.
So it's truly humbling to listen to those stories, and the lab has grown tremendously. We have 480 faculty and staff now, 200 students, and I think just reflecting on those stories and the struggles that the people who made this lab from nothing, from some mud, overcame, gives us really strong confidence that we will deliver FRIB and we will run NSCL and enable discoveries at the same time, and that the future of the lab is even brighter than the past. And that's the power of this place. We leverage what we have and we can become better. In every generation, you know, there's people who do really hard work, and every day that hard work sometimes seems a little daunting because there's practical things like leaks and wrong shipments and things are screwed up. And Sam gave me this cartoon. You know, it is a lot of work. And one loses perspective how this all fits together, but I think that's the power of this event. We have this unique vantage point. After 50 years, we still have people who can look back to the beginning, and we're here to shape the future. So thank you for your work, thank you for the great stories, and the best is yet to come.